Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Podcast Daily. Welcome to the Thursday edition. Hope you've had a great week thus far. It's almost to the end. Just 2 more days. You're going to make it. It's just like the offseason. We take it one day at a time. Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham with me. I am Austin Ward. And Bill has another entry in his series. He actually has a couple of them up since we last talked about this on the podcast over at ohiostate.rivals.com. But today we're diving deeper into the wide receiver group, which... could we just say like it's really good? It's probably the best in the country. It's going to stay the best in the country, and like wrap it up, or would that not really work for an episode?
Good show.
Yeah, I did consider just writing "it's good" period and publishing the story, but you got to fill it up. So I figured out something to write about.
Okay,
has there been a? I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to get this point out first. Has there been a position coach that you can think of that has elevated the status of his room faster than Brian Hartline has done at Ohio State?
Yeah, Ryan Day with the Ohio State quarterback position.
Close.
I was thinking about that earlier. It was like just the combination of those two has been remarkable, and now they've got like a slightly different test ahead of them as they try and take on different roles and play calling and all that stuff that we talked about throughout spring, but the two of them in tandem have elevated the recruiting and the success and the development and everything for their positions in a way that's pretty unprecedented, at least for Ohio State. And it would be a really difficult, I think, for me to think, or maybe you've got somebody in mind like nationally who has done the same thing.
No, I mean, that's what I'm wondering. Like, obviously, and the thing is, Ohio State traditionally has always done a pretty good job developing receivers. It's not like Brian Hartline's the first player, coach at Ohio State to have first round picks at wide receiver, but it had been a while since they had one back. I mean, I think it was Ted Ginn in 2007, right? So, or 2006, whatever year Teddy came out. So it had been a while. And now it's just old hat. It's like, okay, how many are they going to have this year? Is it 2 or 3? I mean, what's next? And it does just seem to be at a level that I can't really like put it against anyone else position wise. I mean, the other guy that I think of would be Kerry Combs at Ohio State when he came in with the cornerbacks, but it just seems different. Just think about 12 years ago, 11 years ago, Urban Meyer walking in and talking about the clown show that the wide receiver room was at Ohio State. He's literally saying clown show, like as a head coach going, this room is a clown show. And everyone going, why is this coach saying this about his team? And think about it now.
Flies in the face of something that Urban said just last month at the coaches clinic, Bill, which was never, when you take over a new program, blame the players.
That's right. Yeah. Never mind. I'm not going to talk about Urban and things he says. Yeah, they're really good. Ohio State has really good wide receivers. Let's talk about those instead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. They're pretty good. They're a lot better than the unit that I first started covering 11 years ago, although there were some good players and NFL caliber players on that team, but nothing quite like resembling Marvin Harrison, Emeka, Egbuka, and Julian Fleming, which is really just scratching the surface.
If Marvin Harrison Jr. Got abducted to go back to his home planet, wherever that is, it's certainly not here on Earth, would Emeka Egbuka be the best returning receiver in college football?
There's an argument for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize, even after covering both of those players a year ago, how close their numbers were until you reminded me of that in your story this week, Bill. Like that, Emeka did that as quietly as he possibly could have, and also while being injured. I'm not sure that he gets the credit he deserves, including from me.
Yeah, and I guess there's something of like, well, they help each other, right? That the attention to one benefits the other, and vice versa. So like, I don't want to dismiss that, but I also think that if they operated independent of each other, they would still put up those kind of numbers because they're that good. And I think I'm very interested to see maybe what they do with both those guys, because we heard a lot about the Marvin slot stuff in the spring, and some of that is probably just a byproduct of Emeka being out for the spring and wanting to give Marvin something to do so he doesn't get bored over the course of the 15 practices. But I do wonder, we did not get into this at all, like if they want to move Emeka outside a little bit. I think he was like 70% of his snaps were in the slot last year. He's a guy, like when he was coming into Ohio State, Berm, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like I didn't view him as a slot only guy. I thought he can kind of play all over the place. So the ability to have two receivers who are that good, but then also not have them hemmed into sort of one role, I think does open the opportunity for them to be even better than they were last year, which is kind of crazy to think because they were already so good.
Yeah, Emeka probably gets overlooked, maybe by everyone around the country. I mean, I have seen those silly, top 10 receivers graphics and that stuff, and most of the time you do see Emeka Egbuka as the second ranked one. So I think there is at least some respect that he's getting around the country. But what Brian Hartline has said over and over is that he wants receivers that can do everything. So if moving Marvin Harrison into the slot means that Emeka Egbuka gets to play outside a little bit more, it's going to help both of them as they head off to the NFL after the 2023 season. So what you want to see is someone else step up. Who's going to be the third guy? Because really for Ohio State, when you go back to the 2021 season, what made Jackson Smith-Njigba so incredible that year? I mean, he broke 2 school records as far as receptions and yards, was that Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson were on the outside or lined up with him. And, those guys were moving into the slot, moving outside. So the more versatility that you have, the better. And I think it's just going to be fascinating to see the development of Julian Fleming now that he's finally fully healthy. It's like they just keep putting little pieces of him back together. And they say now he's going to be ready for the first time forever. And then you have Xavier Johnson, but is someone else going to be able to really emerge? Is it Carnell Tate? Is it Brandon Inniss? Is it, Jaden Ballard? Who's going to be that guy? And it's certainly no shortage of options. But I think for the big picture of the program, having someone else step up now is not only important for the production for Emeka and Marvin this year, but because after this group, these 4 receivers that we all expect to leave after this year, who's next? And that's becoming Brian Hartline's calling card, is to have that next guy ready to go.
Bill, you spent a lot of time asking around and gathering information on the use of the slot and Marvin playing there. So I'll defer most of this to you, but I get the sense that Brian Hartline's preference is if you can't have positionless football, which you can't, you could at least maybe have positionless wide receivers, and that XYZ is not a permanent label on a wide receiver in the Ohio State offense. We saw some of that with Garrett Wilson being able to play both. Chris Olave did some of that. KJ Hill did some of that. And I think you could see the skill sets of those 3 guys being more natural than maybe Marvin Harrison being a factor in the slot, or if we didn't project Emeka Egbuka necessarily there primarily early on, there does seem to be more of this, shift for Ohio State where it can create formations with any 4 or 5 players out there, and that it doesn't like being hemmed in to one guy can only do one thing.
Yeah, there is some interchangeability there. I think that is because of the way that Brian Hartline recruits the position. There are some guys on the roster who I think you might look at and say, Jaden Ballard, for instance, I think is a fairly traditional Z receiver. I don't know if you would put him in the slot in particular. But he might be the only one I might say that about. Otherwise, I do think the guys that Brian Hartline recruits have skill sets that can be used kind of anywhere across the formation, sometimes even out of the backfield. I don't know if if what you're saying is sort of inherently true about the receiver position at large, but I do think it is true about the position at Ohio State. We used to get really consumed with who's the slot, who's the Z, who's the X. And it's not much of a conversation anymore because of the way that Brian Hartline has recruited, but it's interesting nonetheless in my mind when you decide to utilize a guy like Marvin in the slot more. He played there some last year. I think maybe 12 to 15% of his snaps or something like that off the top of my head. So it's not totally foreign, but I also think it's out of necessity too, right? He's going to see more bodies thrown his way lined up outside. So if you can keep defensives guessing by moving him around the formation more, that's to Marvin's benefit and the offense as a whole.
Now, I wonder if this year we could see Emeka Egbuka move into that more of the role they intended for Jackson Smith-Njigba a year ago, where it ended up being Xavier Johnson in that spot where you sometimes flex him out of the backfield or you have him do other stuff like that. Emeka Egbuka could be that guy. And there's been comparisons I've seen with him to Deebo Samuel.
Yep.
As far as his athleticism and the style of play. And if there's one thing we know about Ryan Day, it's that he's looking for ways to get the ball to his playmakers. And if Carnell Tate or Brandon Inniss or Noah Rogers or one of these younger guys steps up and forces themselves into being a must play, I think there is an avenue for Emeka Egbuka to move back into that spot where they ended up having to put Xavier Johnson as a last resort last year. and see if you can get some flexibility with him to keep Marvin in the slot. And you can put Carnell Tate out at Y or Jaden Ballard. Like, there's a lot of things you can do with this group, as talented as they are. And, all of these things are going to help Kyle McCord as he gets comfortable in this first month of the season.
What I heard Berm saying is that I will be asking for Ohio State to run a lot of pop passes and end arounds to Emeka Egbuka. That sounds like that's what I'll be begging for in September. Maybe we'll get it.
Didn't they
not bubble screens? Not screens.
No. Closer to the line of scrimmage. Don't throw that thing out there. Let him come to the ball. Don't get the ball to him. You know what I mean?
I've never asked for more bubble screens, or even one that I can recall. I do like the pop pass a lot.
Yeah, the pop pass is good.
And Kyle McCord, I bet, would like it too, or Devin.
Yeah,
either one.
Easy completions, and also I think the closer that Marvin and Emeka are to Kyle, the better. So I think you can do like the Paris Campbell KJ Hill dual slot action from 2018. Just do that with Marvin and Emeka.
Yeesh. Good luck, defensive coordinators. So the other part of this, Berm, you alluded to the health of Julian Fleming because of all the attention. Brian Hartline's tried. He's seen those graphics and he responds, "Hey, you're leaving Ohio State's third guy out of the top 10, and you shouldn't." He's passionately defended Julian Fleming. Julian was, I guess, maybe the healthiest he was all season in the Peach Bowl, and he was a real asset in that game. And it's taken time. We don't have to go through the whole process of being a blocker in high school and all that learning and overcoming all the shoulder injuries and all that. But he's another guy, because of the attention that goes on number 1 and number 2 now. He probably doesn't get enough credit because he's also not somebody who's likely to come back for another season beyond this one, because he's also got that ceiling, and because of the wear and tear he's already put on his body.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where Brian Hartline has said over and over in the last couple of years, everyone's on their own path. Everyone's on their own journey to figure out exactly how long it takes to develop into what he expects them to develop into. But I do think it's worth reminding people that Julian Fleming's offense in high school was essentially the veer, and he just ran a 9 route every once in a while, and they threw the ball to him because nobody could cover a guy that was that big and fast in high school. That's not the case anymore, and you have to learn how to play actual wide receiver. And we've noticed, I mean, you can see the incremental growth of Julian Fleming over the last couple of years. It's not hard to see that he's gotten better. So you are interested to see, like, if he's healthy, can he be that guy on the outside that's your staple, and then you allow the other guys to move around? Because Julian, we saw him, outrun some defensive backs a few times last year. If he gets behind you, he's going to beat you. And I think that there is a way for him to really launch himself into that first round discussion again next year. And Brian Hartline truly believes that he is a first round caliber wide receiver. So I don't think he should be slept on.
I'm curious what you guys think of this. Like, so when it comes to Julian Fleming and probably Xavier Johnson too, is your anticipation for this year that the usage will look much like it did last year, where it was clearly Marvin and Emeka, and then Julian and Xavier were the next two? Like, how much room do you think there is for Jaden Ballard, Carnell Tate, Brandon Innes to cut into the snaps that maybe Julian Fleming and Xavier Johnson are anticipating for themselves?
I think that Xavier Johnson has proven capable of taking on a heavier workload, and he probably deserves one. The same is true to a lesser extent, because Julian Fleming was already getting a bunch of snaps and is already a starter. He doesn't need a heck of a lot more compared to Xavier, but just because they both deserve it and the next tier below them may push for that doesn't mean that they're going to get it. And the only reason that I say that is it's going to be incredibly tempting for Ryan Day and Brian Hartline to just leave Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka on the field as much as possible. I know we've talked about Ohio State needing more depth at the end of last season as some of the injuries mounted up, especially when it came to a head in the second half of the Peach Bowl. Were those other guys not ready, or whatever the case may be? Like, the depth may be more prepared and better equipped to go out and play, but that still means that you have to take off 2 first-round NFL draft picks. And I don't know, as we sit here right now, what the willingness would be for the coaching staff to do that. Because if it were me and I was playing Madden or NCAA football and I had those 2 guys, I would never take them off the field. Now, I would turn off fatigue so that I didn't have to do that, but that's not reality. So I don't. The answer to that is like I don't know. I think that the depth is better suited for them to rotate 6. Will they actually do that when it comes time to say, Marvin, go sit on the bench for a couple snaps and rest? Like I don't know if they will.
I think you are entering a world that's very different than it was a year ago, primarily because these freshman wide receivers in Tate and Noah Rogers and Brandon Ennis and Bryson Rogers are all expecting to play a whole lot more than the 2022 class expected to play last year. And while they all individually have said they came to Ohio State for development, they realized that they could have taken the quick buck somewhere else and the NIL money and all that other stuff. That's still out there, and you do have to manage that and balance all these things. So there is going to need to be more playing time for that group than there was the 22 group. The 22 group, which is now only 2 guys with Keon Grays and Kojo Antwi after the transfers of Caleb Burton and Caleb Brown. But you got to find a way to get these guys on the field, whether that's Brandon Ennis in the return game, whether it's making sure that Carnell Tate is rotating. And again, I really do believe that's one of the reasons why this Marvin Harrison to the slot experiment in spring could have some real fruit for Ohio State, because there is enough that they've seen out of Carnell Tate on the outside to say, hey, we can trust this guy. And I really do believe if the 23 group was the 22 group, when Marvin Harrison was targeted and knocked out of the game against Georgia, Ohio State would have had a Devontae Smith true freshman moment against Georgia with one of those guys coming in. And they didn't get it because that group was not ready. The 23 group is ready. You have to find room for these guys to be on the field.
Yeah, that's like the biggest difference for me is because you're right. Like all that group showed up, the 2023 group showed up like expecting to play more than the class before them, but they've also shown up like much more prepared to do that, I think, than the class before them did. So it's a different calculation. Like there wasn't really, I suppose over the course of the season, I thought to myself at times, like there's an opening to play some of these young receivers, but I don't know. I never felt like the impulse to like pound my fist on the table to say, like, you got to play these young guys. I think I will feel that this year with this group in particular for a lot of reasons. Now, I agree with Austin. Like, I don't think that should come at the expense of Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka snaps. Like when it's a blowout, sure, get those guys off the field. But in my mind, it's like you have 2 and then you have another spot or 2 if you decide you want to play 4 receivers at a time to then rotate in the rest of the room. And like for as much promise as Julian Fleming, I think did show at times last year, and certainly Xavier Johnson stepped up in a major role, I'm not so sure that either of those guys are so good that they should block these younger players from like playing at all or relegate them to a position that the younger guys were in last year. Like I think I would maybe take some issue with that if that's how it played out.
That's why I think this year is just so fascinating for Brian Hartline specifically, obviously taking over as the offensive coordinator. Like this year in the way to manage and handle these egos and handle the playing time and injuries and all these, like that would be a much bigger task for him this year, regardless of whether or not he was the offensive coordinator for the first time in his career. And now you have to try to balance both those things. And I do wonder, how do you prepare to do that? Because it's not a simple transition.
He's got a track record of handling it pretty well. I mean, that's not a group that's, as you said, Berm, that things are changing in the NIL world, and this group in particular of Ohio State freshman receivers does seem more capable of making a larger impact. So that's going to be maybe a bit more challenging to juggle, but this has been going on for several years where there's a bunch of talented guys who have to wait their turn. I don't feel like the way that Ohio State or Brian Hartline specifically manages their recruitments misleads them into thinking you could show up on day one and be Marvin Harrison. I think the three of us all have it burned into our memories, the conversations during Garrett Wilson's freshman year with Brian Hartline, where he's like, you guys should stop talking about him because I'm not ready for him to be that just yet. Now, that happened several weeks later, especially at Nebraska, but like he's got a way of coaching hard and honestly that seems to help manage some of that, where the reps are not going to be, they're not going to be a lot of targets for them. Like, as you said, they may have to get more creative. Could be fourth quarters of games, could be return game. But there's competition to do that too, coming from other positions. Like it's hard to pencil them into the mix, and that's even knowing how great Carnell Tate looked with those opportunities in spring and how much excitement there is for Brandon Ennis as he arrives this summer. Like, that's still a tall task considering how well Ohio State is recruited and developed ahead of them. Like, I don't think that should be the expectation. And if any of these guys are coming in thinking it's going to be that easy, I don't think it'll be. I think Brian Hartline will get them in line pretty quickly because he's done that to very good players several times before.
Yeah, and it's always the same conversation, is that we're talking about the upperclassmen, we're talking about the freshmen, and then in the middle there's Jaden Ballard. And you're like, how do you find a way to make sure that Jaden Ballard does what you want to see him do? And how does he fight off the conversation about all the other guys and not him? And it is not fair, and I think we can acknowledge that, but that is the nature of the beast. You talk about the NFL guys and you talk about the incoming freshmen, and everyone else is pretty much just in the quagmire in no man's land of your third year, and you're like, oh, now what? And that shouldn't be the case. Jaden Ballard, was a lot of discussion about him heading into the spring. I don't think he hurt himself this spring. I think he did a nice job of quitting himself and putting himself in the conversation. But how do you find room for all these guys?
It's a good question. I wonder, like, if Kyle McCord is starting quarterback, maybe how much that might. He seems to have a pretty strong relationship with Jaden Ballard. Like, would he lobby at all for Jaden to get a little more time maybe than he would otherwise? Or if Kyle's opinion even matters, I'm not sure. He's never started a game, but I know, like, they're roommates, aren't they? Or at least they were at a time.
Hey, now he has started a game, Bill.
Oh, I'm sorry, he did start against Akron. That's right.
Kyle McCord, when he came into Ohio
Show
State,
some respect for the Philadelphia Catholic League. All right,
My bad.
His three roommates were Jaden Ballard, Marvin Harrison, and Emeka Egbuka. So they are all very close. And again, I don't think when those guys came in by this point in their career, the thought was probably, hey, Jackson will be gone, Julian will be gone, all these guys will be gone, and we'll just have the three of us run it. But Julian's career, as you said, like, the path is different for everyone. So now you got to figure out a way. And then you have someone like Xavier Johnson, who not only is a walk-on who turned out to be a damn good football player, but now he's a walk-on who's on scholarship and in his sixth year. So it's like, oh crap, now this gets even weirder. And oh crap, we also have to throw the ball to Cade Stover and Joe Royer. And oh crap, we also have 5 running backs that have to get the ball. Like, it's kind of, this is life in the big city, boys. You choose it or you lose it. You know what I mean?
Well, it's like they're playing with Monopoly money. They have so many options. As Bill and I were talking about without the running backs, like, if you're trying to factor in getting touches and getting targets for Xavier Johnson, for example, well, if you move around Emeka Egbuka and bring him to the backfield, that directly has an impact on Xavier Johnson. If Evan Pryor comes back and is healthy enough to play sort of that hybrid role, that factors into the way that you use both of those guys, and potentially maybe where you line up Marvin Harrison. Like, who knows? Like, there are so many weapons on this team without even getting into the tight ends, which Bill also wrote about on Wednesday at OhioState.Rivals.com. Like, you'd like to think that this year Cade Stover, Joe Royer, G. Scott Jr., or perhaps Jelani Thurman, who I wrote about as well, like, that those guys would be a factor in the passing game. But as Kevin Wilson had always described before, including with Bill and I a couple of months ago, when you have to put them in a list. Who are the people that absolutely have to touch the football for Ohio State? Like, even when you get to somebody like Carnell Tate, if he's 4th or 5th or 6th in the wide receiver pecking order, any one of those, that doesn't mean that he's the 4th or 5th or 6th option in the offense, because he's absolutely not once you factor in the running backs and potentially the tight ends. So that makes it hard to start putting in numbers and building in snaps, let alone targets and catches and touchdowns for these guys, because that's a precious commodity with one football.
See, this is what I was going to ask. I'm glad you brought this up. The most dysfunctional Ohio State offense of the last decade was the 2015 season, when the Buckeyes had the most talent that they probably ever had on one team. And a big portion of that problem was saying, well, we have to get the ball to Braxton Miller. We have to give the ball to this guy. We have to do this, rather than saying, we're going to get it to the guy who's open. Now, Marvin Harrison is obviously the best receiver in college football, but he's also always open, right? So it's not like you're forcing him the ball because he's always open anyway. It's not like you're throwing him weird things where you're forcing it in triple coverage, because there is no triple coverage with a guy that can't be covered. So how do you worry that going into this year, because of Kyle McCord being a first-time starter or Devin Brown being a first-time starter, do you worry that Ohio State will get too caught up and too bogged down with a first-time offensive coordinator saying, we got to get the ball to this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, or is it just let the offense run its natural flow?
I am not worried about that because Tim Beck and Ed Warner are coordinating this offense.
Let's be clear. Those guys, they were the coordinators in name only. Okay. They were suggesting plays to Urban Meyer, who would say, get it to Braxton, run JT.
Yeah.
Like,
okay. No, that's good. So Ed Warner and Tim Beck are not coordinating the offense, and the head coach is not meddling in a way with getting the ball into the hands of the guy that he's obsessed with because he thinks he can be Percy Harvin when he can't be. So no, I'm not. I think, like, all kidding aside, like I think you do raise a good point. Like I think it's possible to get overwhelmed with the amount of weapons that you have at your disposal, and Ohio State has a lot of them. I think I trust this brain trust to figure it out, and I'm not super concerned about it.
I think it's interesting that Byrne picked 2015 and not the Ohio State offense the following year that got shut out by Clemson in the semifinal.
Yeah, that was a bad offense, but they
That
didn't have
offense
the
is probably
players.
because they only had one good player, and it was Curtis
Right.
Samuel.
They didn't have the 2015 weapons, and that's why I picked that year.
Yeah.
Also,
but I think Bill's point probably makes
the
it
big
more
picture,
dysfunctional
in
if you
the
only have
big
one good
picture,
player.
in the big picture, well, because they only had one good player. It's hard to get him the ball. Everyone knows you're throwing it to him or handing it to him. In the big picture, that 2016 31-0 shutout had to happen for this current iteration of Ohio State football to exist. So little blessings, I guess, for those of people out there who are concerned about that sort of thing.
Out of the ashes of Phoenix arose.
Out of the ashes in Phoenix, a new day
Glendale
emerged.
There it is. Berm got it all the way there. I teed him up and then he let it fly, and he brought us home with the perfect, just bit of poetry.
Hold on, wait. I want to have a 15-minute conversation about Jeremiah Smith.
Oh
God.
Just kidding. We don't have to do
No,
that
but we are talking position groups. We're talking, about the present, the future, etc. What you do see, and I was, talking about Brandon Ennis and Carnell Tate and Noah Rogers and getting on the field, that next wave is going to come in next year and expect the same opportunities. So there, Jeremiah Smith, Mylan Graham, whoever ends up being the third or fourth in this 2024 class, like they will be better served by having Carnell Tate or Brandon Ennis or Jaden Ballard or Noah Rogers or Kojo Answe or Keon Grace, those guys getting a chance to emerge this year and being able to lead them next year. Otherwise, you got the blind leading the blind, and that's a bigger concern for Brian Hartline next year. So I think there is very good reasons to say, well, they don't need to get on the field this year. You got all this going on, but like there are good reasons. Bill and I were talking about it when we talked about the quarterbacks. Like whoever the quarterback is in the 2024 season, doggy, that is potentially a very unsettling season as far as all of the losses that you're having on the roster. And so you got to get these guys ready to go in that room and be ready to play next season. So that's my final point.
Okay. I do feel like we've had a number of shows where all of us have talked about our experiences either watching film or seeing Jeremiah Smith in person. So I didn't know if it was absolutely necessary, but if you still have 13 minutes available to you, Bill, if you would like them.
I think he's going to be like All-American his freshman year, and maybe we'll just leave it at that. He's really good.
Just really good.
Yeah.
Hey, what a neat conclusion. We've come full circle. Ohio State's wide receivers, good now, good later. That's all
Good
you
forever.
need to know, I guess. Yeah,
They're like pizza.
And they are?
Yeah, they're good now. You can put them in the fridge. They're good later. You don't even have to heat them back up. They're always ready. They're hot and ready.
But you don't eat leftover pizza.
I eat frozen. I'll eat refrigerated pizza the next day, not like 3 hours later. That's weird. But if it's the next day, I actually think there are some pizza places that are better in the fridge the next day. Like Pizza Hut, if you get forced to eat Pizza Hut, it's better the second day. Papa John's is the same way.
Yeah.
Better the second day.
I don't know. Papa John's is good at any point.
You
That's
know
my
what's
point.
never good? Marco's Pizza.
Don't say that. Don't do me like that, Jimmy Fallon. That's not true. You know I'm a Toledo guy. You know the Marco's is a Toledo-based chain. How dare you?
Thanks for joining us for the podcast daily for Thursday. We hope you enjoyed this conversation about the wide receivers. We have more position breakdowns coming to talk about here on the podcast, and as Bill writes about them all at ohiostate.rivals.com. Feel free to join us there. Get a month on us. Use the code DTE30. That'll do it for Thursday. We'll be back with a Freaky Friday. I think we might do a mailbag. Does that sound good to everybody? Get your questions in. Send them to us. We'll answer those on Friday's show, Friday's edition of the podcast daily. Thanks again for Bill and Brian. I'm Austin. We'll talk to you later.